So here's the thing. A couple weeks ago I made a review on the live-action Lilo and Stitch, which I proclaimed to be the worst live-action Disney remake. Mask off for a second, thank you very much for the reception, that is insane. I'm honored that so many people care about my bullshit to watch it. Mask back on, gimme more. In the comments of that video, a lot of people took umbrage with that claim, saying that other Disney remakes deserve the title a lot more. A lot of people said Mulan, some people said Aladdin, however, by far, the most common response I got was people saying that the 2025 remake of Snow White is the worst Disney remake. Two awful remakes in the same year. Goddamn Disney, you're not having a good time, are ya? The first couple times I heard this, I was skeptical. Remember, Lilo and Stitch was the worst remake because it so utterly trounced on the themes of the original, which I thought were very powerful and moving, and I got so angry at it, my voice got hoarse because I was yelling so much in that video. I don't normally yell much in real life at all, let alone in a video, so you know that shit had to get me heated. But still, the comments kept coming and they didn't stop coming. It got to the point where my brother called me and told me to watch the Snow White remake because it's that bad. Hey, you know what they say, give the people what they want. The hell else am I gonna do it 4 hours? Socialize? Like a fucking loser? And so that's what I did, folks. I sat my ass down and I watched both the 1937 classic and the 2025 not that, and now it's time to figure out if Snow White is the worst live-action Disney remake. But, 1 second. Alright, there we go, that's better. I'm sure everyone over the age of 4 days knows the plot to Snow White, but just for the sake of comparison, let's quickly go over the story of the original. Once upon a time, in a faraway land, there was a king and a queen who had a daughter. Her skin was white as snow, and me, so they called her Snow White. One day the queen died, no one gave a shit, so the king married a hot lady, but oh no! She was a witch! An evil witch! She's an incredibly vain woman, so every day she goes up to a magic mirror and, well, we all know what she says. Magic mirror on the wall, suck my dick and lick my balls. Wait, no, that's the other Snow White movie I have. The evil queen puts Snow White to work as a maid, and one day, while cleaning next to a well, she says, "Oh boy, I sure wish there was a guy next to me." And hark! The village pervert leers at her from behind the wall. Incensed by someone giving Snow White attention, the evil queen sends her huntsman off to kill her. But after realizing he doesn't get paid enough to kill children, he decides to just let her run off into the woods. There she meets a menagerie of magical mining short people, and they all decide to live together. Then nothing happens for about 40 minutes, and the queen realizes Snow White's still alive, so she turns herself into a witch, goes out to kill her with the poison apple, she succeeds, and then the dwarves chase her off a cliff, and Snow White is dead. Oh no. But don't worry, the village pervert's back! Alright, fine, he's actually a prince. And one true love's kiss later, bam! She's awake, they all ride off together, and they lived happily ever after. The end. I have complicated opinions about this movie. On one hand, I absolutely respect it as a piece of art. Not only was it one of the first animated films ever made, but just the amount of effort they put into it, the amount of new animation techniques they came up with just to make this work, it's inspiring. On the other hand, it's kind of bad. Not only is the pacing extremely weird, it's very obvious that this is Disney's first time making a feature-length film. They're clearly more used to just making shorts, but there's also just a bunch of weird shit in it that you wouldn't see today. Sometimes the weird stuff is interesting from a historical context, like Snow White praying to the god above. Other times, it's the dwarves doing a whole ass song and dance about washing their hands. It doesn't really feel so much like a cohesive film, and more like a bunch of Disney shorts sandwiched between 10 minutes of collective plot. I think the best example of how strange this movie can be sometimes is with the introduction of the dwarves. Snow White gets to the cabin, she lies in their beds, she goes to sleep, the screen fades to black, and then it's just... Oh, hey, what's up? It's important, and I can definitely respect it, but I don't like the original Snow White. But compared to a remake, it's a fucking masterpiece. For the most part, the film follows kind of the same plot as the original. Snow White is still a princess, her stepmother is still an evil queen, huntsman, dwarves, apple, kiss, happy ending. But even very early on, the film starts to deviate slightly from the original. Instead of meeting a pervert at a wishing well, she meets a fuckboy in the kitchen. Snow White is... Snow White looks a little different, huh? I think it's her hair. Snow White's fucking around cleaning and then suddenly, bam, potato thief, get him. The film has this whole through line that under the evil queen, the kingdom is suffering. The people are starving, they have to become soldiers just to survive. You know, typical medieval kingdom stuff. Now on its surface, this isn't necessarily a problem, but things start to derail a little bit. The biggest problem with this movie is that it has a massive identity crisis. It doesn't know what it wants to be. Does it want to be a faithful remake of the original Snow White, or a modern retelling that ups the stakes a little bit? It can't decide. The easiest place to spot this is with the plot progression. See, basically everything up to Snow White getting poisoned by the evil queen happens almost exactly how it does in the original. Just with a couple of added scenes with this new guy, Jonathan, who is the prince analog. He's the thief. He tells Snow White, if you're the princess, you should do something. And Snow White says, I want to do something, but I can't. Well, you should. Okay. And she lets him go. And then, yeah, she basically becomes an enemy of the state. You know, I just fucking realized before I even got to the point I was trying to make, I already made the point. The evil queen is still incredibly vain. That's her main character trait. She wants to kill Snow White because she's the fairest of them all, but they also give a legitimate reason for why the evil queen would want Snow White out of the picture, because she's an enemy of the state who's trying to inspire change and all that shit. So it's like, what are you? Are you a film where the main villain is just a vain bitch, or are you a film where the main villain is a queen who's trying to hold on to power? What is it? But anyways, like I said, the rest of the film plays out pretty much the same. Snow White runs off, she finds the dwarves, they whistle while they work, the dwarves hi-ho, all that bullshit. But then, Snow White says, I can't stay here, it's dangerous for you, I have to go, bye! And she leaves, and they just added in another act to the story, which just completely fucks up the pacing. You see, most contemporary stories follow the 3-act structure, and yes, I know pretty much anyone who has done any amount of studying into the arts can tell you the 3-act structure like the back of their hands, but for the sake of the blue-collar workers, let's just quickly go over it. Actually, who am I talking about? If you studied art, you probably are a blue-collar worker. I am. Instead of breaking down the 3-act structure, I'm going to go full English teacher and defer to a chart while citing example. The great thing is, the original Snow White follows the 3-act structure almost perfectly, and so is a great example to use when breaking this down. Remember how I broke down Snow White's story earlier on in the video? Guess what? I already did it following this exact chart. Exposition, also known as setup. Snow White's parents are dead, Evil Queen is in charge. Inciting incident, the moment that starts the story. Evil Queen hears that Snow White is the fairest of them all, decides to kill her. Plot point 1, the huntsman decides not to kill Snow White and has her run off. Rising action, Snow White finds the dwarves. Midpoint, them just sort of living together. Plot point 2, Evil Queen learns Snow White is still alive and decides to kill her herself. Pre-climax, Evil Queen makes her way to Snow White. Climax, Snow White bites the poison apple and Queen falls off the cliff. Denouement, or falling action, or resolution. Prince comes, kiss, everyone's happy, the end. It's very simple, but it's also the most effective way of getting your story across, which is why it's still used widely today. Now, this doesn't mean that every single story has to have 3 acts. You can have stories with 5 acts, 4 acts, 2 acts, 1 act. That's the great thing about art. If you're skilled enough, any rule can be broken. Unfortunately, the people who made this are not skilled enough. The problem with just shoving in a whole new act is that it completely screws over the plot progression and pacing of the movie. So like I said, Snow White leaves the dwarves, she meets up with Jonathan and his band of thieves, and then they kind of have a little adventure, and then, oh god, Jonathan got shot. So she takes him back to the dwarves, who heal him up, and then they kind of screw around for a little bit. Jonathan and Snow White fall in love, and then basically everyone splits back up, and then the poison apple thing happens. It took me a day or two to figure it out, but even when I was watching the movie, I could immediately tell there was something weird going on with the fact that Snow White gets to the dwarves, they do the stuff from the original movie for like half an hour, then she just leaves for 10 minutes and then comes right back. It's just so strange to do it like that. I could see a version of this movie that plays out a little bit better if, when Snow White lets Jonathan go, she runs off with him, and then her and his entire crew meet the dwarves, and they do the stuff from the original for a little bit while hiding out. That would also positively affect Snow White's character, which I feel like we do need to talk about now. I'm not going to talk about it. I know what you guys want me to talk about, I'm not going to talk about it. Actually, this movie comes up with a pretty funny cover for it. Instead of Snow White being named after her skin color, she's named Snow White because she was born on a snowy day. I'm not fucking kidding. That's what they do. That's amazing. That's fucking A-tier writing there, Disney. That's how you figure it out. To be completely fair to Rachel Zegler, as an actress, I think she does a fine job, and as a singer, pretty alright. She does a good enough job playing the part that whenever a problem does arise, I have to chalk it up to bad direction. As well as, you know, a whole other problem I'll get into in a second. Something interesting I never really realized until I went back to watch the original is that Snow White is very, very, very obviously a very young girl. Like, the character of Snow White, I'd be shocked if her age was in the double digits. It's pretty obvious just by everything. Her design, the way she moves, her mannerisms, her lines. She acts like a child. And she's drawn like a child. And at a certain point, I have to just realize sometimes a child's just a child. I feel like with that in mind, it actually kind of lessens some of the famous criticisms that the character has gotten. Oh, she's very passive and weak-willed and not a good role model. She's like 8. I wouldn't expect any 8-year-old to be a good role model. It's most evident in her interactions with the dwarves. It's less maternal, like some people have criticized her, and more like a child playing with her toys. And the reason why I know this is intentional is because she is literally modeled after a child. Remember back when I said Snow White pioneered a lot of new animation techniques? Well, this is one of them. You see, early on in animation, especially here in the West, realism wasn't focused on at all. There's a reason why we call old cartoons rubber hose cartoons. People didn't have bones, they just had rubber hose arms that flopped around. Because of this, trying to make an anatomically correct human with these animation styles just would look gross. We actually get to see that with this old Disney cartoon called The
Goddess of Spring.
Good God, that's weird. So in order to make sure that they could get the movements down right, what Disney did was basically film the entire movie. They would have actors act out the scenes, record it, and then the animators would watch it and draw alongside it in order to make sure that the movements weren't too fluid and weren't too stiff. Just right to feel natural. Some people might hear this and think rotoscoping, but no, this is completely different. That's tracing over the film itself. And believe it or not, we actually still have some of this footage. Look, here it is. Pretty cool, huh? Now, the girl who modeled for Snow White while making the movie was Marge Champion, who has one hell of a name, but at the time, she was 14 years old. And while talking about her time at Disney, Marge had this to say. The animators couldn't take a young girl out of themselves. They couldn't take the prince out of themselves. What the fuck does that mean? Oh, sweet Jesus. Hollywood's literally always been like this, hasn't it? My point in this whole thing is that Snow White's personality in the original was very clearly a young child. And, well, this ain't a child, so they gotta change that. And they really didn't. I fucking swear to God, Snow White almost acts more like a child in the remake. For one thing, she almost comes across more naive. Throughout this entire film, she's going on about how she has to go find her father, but like, what the fuck are you talking about? At the very start of the film, they say, in no uncertain terms, her father is dead. The quote is something along the lines of, he went off to war and then never came back. What am I supposed to interpret from that, Disney? And since like 10 years pass, does she think he's still off fighting the war and just never heard from him? No, bitch, he's dead. But throughout the film, she just keeps repeating it. I have to go find my father. I'm gonna find my father. To the point, I started to think the film was just gaslighting me and that the dad was alive. But no! At the end, when the queen poisons Snow White, she says, "Ah, yes, you were easy to kill, just like your dead father." And it's like, yeah, he's dead. Why are you acting like it's a twist? You told us he's dead. This hat is progressively fucking up my hair on the inside, so whenever I reposition it, it just looks worse. The other thing that makes Snow White just feel weird is every now and then they recreate something from the original and it just doesn't feel right. This Snow White isn't a child, but she's acting like one. For example, in the scene where she's running through the woods, it just feels weirder to have a fully grown woman screaming at trees that look a little scary than it would if it was a 10-year-old girl. Sure, she's probably stressed she had a knife pulled on her, but it really feels like this is just here for the sake of being like the original. Oh shit! Oh god, I said the magic word, everyone! Yay! Yep, just like I said, it's that whole identity crisis bullshit. Snow White as a character just gets it the worst because she's just two different characters depending on where you are in the film. Even down to the way she moves is different. You know, you get moments where she does whistle while you work, where she's doing the whole graceful movement, spinning around shit, and then we cut immediately to the next scene and she's just walking through the woods like fucking I would. It's just so jarring. It's like there's two different Snow Whites in this movie. It's mental. That actually transitions nicely into the music. Whoa. Only 2 songs from the original are in this movie, which, in all fairness, they're the only 2 songs anyone even remembers from the original. Whistle While You Work and Hi Ho. However, their inclusion just causes problems for the film's musical identity. I'm not gonna go into full music theory or anything, but I don't really think I have to. You can just listen to them and tell these songs do not sound like they came from the same movie. And they didn't, because 2 of them were written almost 100 years ago. It's just so jarring to go from something like Whistle While You Work to Princess Problems or that stupid fucking love song that sounds like a pop song from 2005. And speaking of the music, what the fuck were people doing with the voice processing? I genuinely believed that everyone was just on auto-tune because, oh my god, these voices sound fake as shit. I obviously can't play the music for you because Disney would lynch me, but if you go out and listen to it, everyone sounds like a fucking robot half the time. Like, fuck man, if you can't find people who can sing, just find people who can sing. You're Disney. And if they can sing, then why are you fucking with it this much? It's just, I don't understand. I just don't understand. And while we're on songs, the fucking Evil Queen song is terrible. I listened to it. I couldn't even pick up the fucking melody. It's really astonishingly bad, especially for Disney. I'm kind of now realizing I didn't really talk about any of the other characters, but it doesn't really matter because they're all basically the same. The only interesting thing that they really do is try and make the dwarves feel a little bit more magical. For one thing, the dwarves are apparently like over 270 years old, and for another, they have this weird like hand magic. Now that I think about it, this is fucking weird. They have this like hand magic where like they touch a rock and it makes it glow, and I guess it tells them where the diamonds are, and they have a whole line about that in the new version of Hi Ho. So you'd think that that would come back into play in the end, but no, the dwarves never really do any magic. It's just a setup without any payoff. Honestly, outside of healing Jonathan, the dwarves don't do anything in this movie. At least in the original, they chased the evil witch off a cliff. Here, they don't really do anything, especially not with stopping the evil queen. Instead of the evil queen just falling off a cliff, at the end of the movie, Snow White comes up to the castle, and she's wearing this big cloak, and the evil queen walks out with her guards, and I literally thought she was about to throw the cloak off and have a bunch of swords and have a big sword fight with the queen. But no, instead, all the peasants crowd around them, and the evil queen makes a big knife, and she's like, "Come on, Snow White, do it! Stab me! Do it! Stab me! Please stab me." But no, Snow White decides to be lame and not kill her. So the evil queen tells her guards to kill Snow White, but just before they do, she says, "Wait! I know you! You were the baker, and you were the butcher, and you were the town drunk!" Then she gives a whole little speech, and everyone decides, fuck the queen, we're with you. And that's it. It's like they wanted a revolution, but they didn't want anyone to fight. Which isn't how revolutions work. So then the evil queen goes like, "No! No, I've been defeated!" And she goes off to the magic mirror room, and the magic mirror just spells out the moral of the story. He literally says, the reason why you're not the fairest is because it's the inside that counts. That's what makes Snow White the fairest. And then the evil queen throws her scepter at the mirror, and it breaks, and she gets sucked into the mirror, and that's it. One last thing about this ending before we wrap this mess up and I have to somehow make this sound coherent in editing. As you may have noticed, they changed around the order of things a little bit to the film's detriment. Obviously, Snow White's alive before the queen dies, which is not how things play out in the original, and I think that just harms the ending. The original paced its ending out in the way it did very deliberately, because in earlier versions of the story, Snow White does wake up before the Queen dies. However, in order to make that happy ending a bit more impactful, they kill off the Queen, and then we have everyone be sad because Snow White is dead, and then, oh, here comes the prince! Kiss! It's a miracle! She's alive! Yay! They get on the horse! They start riding off to the sunset, they see a beautiful castle, happily ever after, and boom! We're done! And then the people walk out with smiles, everyone's happy. In this movie, we do the scene where everyone's sad, Snow White's dead, and then, oh, she's alive! Yay! We're all happy! But then we have to pump the brakes on it, and then go do a revolution, and then everyone gets to have their happily ever after. Again, just like that dwarf shit earlier on in the video, they'll just throw in a whole new thing that just completely fucks up the pacing of the whole movie. And so that's enough of Snow White. I think you get the point now. The film's not good. But, is it the worst Disney remake? So here's the problem. It doesn't matter how bad this movie is, I was never gonna get as upset with it as I did with Lilo and Stitch. It just comes down to the fact that that movie means so much more to me than Snow White does. Seeing Snow White be completely torn apart on the screen, it just doesn't feel the same. So subjectively, no, Lilo and Stitch is still worse, but if we're looking at it objectively, yeah, kinda. To be fair, I haven't seen every live-action Disney remake. Actually, you know what? That might make a good video. But from what I have seen, at least Lilo and Stitch has a decent story structure. At least the basics of the movie function. The problems with Lilo and Stitch are more metatextual. It's the themes and all that shit that completely sinks that film. So yeah, I'll put it like this. As a remake, I think Lilo and Stitch is still worse. As a movie, yes, Snow White is definitely worse. So there you have it. The internet just bullied me into watching a movie I didn't want to watch and knew would be bad. At least I can take solace in knowing I didn't give Disney money for this one. I'm Sir Strongman, and that was the thing.